start 131, Kuf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, 131b. We're close to the end of the page, but we're still about 15 lines up. The line starts Kiba Nashim. We're up to the word Shofar. We're discussing the opinion of Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer holds that preparations for a mitzvah can push off Shabbos, like preparations for the bris. We learned a bunch of things so far. We learned that preparation for the Omer and Shtei Alechem, that pushes off Shabbos. We learned the preparations of a lulav push off Shabbos, preparations of a sukkah push off Shabbos. We learned preparations of matzah push off Shabbos. We're discussing now shofar. He holds that if you don't have a shofar, the preparations for the shofar also push off Shabbos. So it goes like this: shofar v'chol machshir v'dechenes Shabbos div Rabbi Lezer. Shofar and all of its preparations, preparing the shofar, that probably means cutting it off the animal, taking out the marrow on the inside. All of that push off Shabbos. That's what the words of Rabbi Lezer. Where does Rabbi Lezer know that from? If you learned it from the Omer, Omer is the offering that's brought from barley on this on the second day of Pesach. That you cut the barley before, you cut the barley even if it's on Shabbos. And the Shtei Alechem, which is the sacrifice that's brought on Shavuos, which is brought from wheat, which if you don't have the wheat, you can cut it on Shabbos. So if you can do that on Shabbos, you should also be able to prepare a shofar on Shabbos. It says, no, shekein tzarech gavaya. You can't learn from them. Those are sacrifices. Maybe sacrifices in general are push off Shabbos. Imi lulav. What about lulav? That's not a sacrifice. We learned that a lulav, if you don't have one, you can cut it off the tree, according to Rabbi Lezer, on Shabbos. No, shekein tanar ba'aminim. That is very important. There's four species that go along with the lulav, including the lulav. And so that maybe pushes off Shabbos, but who says that just a single shofar is going to push off Shabbos, to cut it off the animal? Or maybe to bring it from outside the tchum or something. Ime sukkah, what about a sukkah? A sukkah is just one mitzvah. Well, sukkah shkinehegas b'leilas k'biyamin. Sukkah is at night and by day. Special stringencies, that should push off Shabbos, but just the shofar, which is only by day, maybe not. Ime matzah. But what about the matzah? The matzah is only by night. Shekein nehegas b'nashim k'ba'nashim. No, matzah is very strict. Matzah pushes off Shabbos because it applies to men and women alike. Shofar is only for men. Women like to hear it, but it's really the mitzvah. It's mitzvah seishas man grama. They don't really have to hear the shofar. That's why for Sfardim, they wouldn't make a bracha if you're blowing the shofar for women. Ashkenazim do, but because Ashkenazim allow women to take on mitzvahs and say brachas on those mitzvahs. And the Rambam doesn't hold that. That if they're not obligated in it, they shouldn't be saying brachas. So shofar is not for women. So the fact that matzah pushes off Shabbos, that could be a special stringency in matzah. Why does matzah push off Shabbos? We said yesterday, because anyone that's not allowed to eat chametz has the mitzvah to eat matzah. And since not to eat chametz is a negative command, and women are obligated in all negative commands, of course, no one's going to say that, women are allowed to worship idols. It's they're exempt for some reason. No, there's no such thing. All the negative command, the women are obligated. They have to keep kosher and all of that. It's only the positive commands that the women are exempt from, if they're time bound. Elamakra, rather, we need to learn this from a pasuk. Why does shofar push off Shabbos, even the preparations of shofar, according to Rabbi Eliezer? It says, Yom Shor Yelachem. The Gemara learns, "B'yayim afilu b'Shabbos." It's a day of blasting the shofar, of blowing the shofar, and that when it says the day, it means that day means even if it's on Shabbos. Okay, Now the Gemara needs to explain, because what did we learn from that? That it's even on Shabbos. What is even on Shabbos? So Zulamai, what is the pasuk telling me that this shofar is stronger than Shabbos? In regards to what? Eily Melitkia, is it telling me that I'm allowed to blow the shofar on Shabbos? We don't play instruments on Shabbos. So is it telling me that I'm allowed to blow it on Shabbos? That can't be, because Hatana Debei Shmuel, that's interesting, was taught in the yeshiva of Shmuel, the pasuk that says you shall not do any work. Tkiya shofar is not considered work. And also removing the bread from the oven is not considered work. It's considered chachma, a skill, but it's not considered labor. So to blow the shofar is more of a talent than it is labor. And therefore, technically, you're allowed to blow the shofar on Shabbos. Yeah, there's other issues of din dechal, there's other issues, but it's clearly not a malacha to blow the shofar on Shabbos. So do I really need a pasuk to tell me you're allowed to blow the shofar on Shabbos when it was never prohibited? So it must be Ela Lamachshirin. The pasuk must be telling me that I'm allowed to prepare the shofar. That's a real malacha. Making it into an instrument, cutting it off, carrying it from outside the tchum, or through Shasarabim, all of those real malachas that would be prohibited on Shabbos, the Torah tells me I'm allowed to do that. Rabbanan. What do the Rabbanan do with that pasuk? It says Bayayim. It seems to tell me that I can even do it on Shabbos. Hahumi Bayle, that pasuk is needed. Bayayim Balay Balayla, that the shofar is blown by day, it's not blown by night. Interesting. Blow the shofar in the morning. Rabbi Lezer. What is Rabbi Lezer? How does he know that the shofar is blown by day and not by night? How does Rabbi Lezer know that? He used the word bayayim. They each have $1 here. The Rabbanan spent it on that you blow the shofar by day. Rabbi Lezer spent it on that you prepare the shofar on Shabbos. How's he going to get that you blow the shofar by day? He already used up his one pasuk. So nafkalei mi b'yom kippurim tavir shofar b'chalayitzach. V'gamri me'adadi. Well, there is every 50 years on Yom Kippur, they blow the shofar. It's a yovel, it's the Jubilee year, and they blow the shofar. Some big things happen, and they blow the shofar then. And because that is done by day, so Rabbi Lezer learns from that, well, the shofar of Yom Kippur is by day. Yeah, I know it's once in 50 years, but the shofar of Rosh Hashanah is also by day, because we learn Yom Kippur to Rosh Hashanah. In other places, we learn how to blow the shofar, tkiya. There's other things that we learn from it. So that halacha that it's by day also applies. The Gemara says, this we've been practicing a bunch of times. We had already 4 or 5 times that other halachas that push off Shabbos. They're more important than Shabbos. They're done even on Shabbos, even though it would be regularly that would be prohibited, but because of these mitzvahs, you're allowed to do it. That was the Omer and the Shtei Alechem, the lulav, the sukkah, the matzah, those things. Now we're suggesting, why does it need to say by all of those that those push off Shabbos? If shofar pushes off Shabbos, I'd be able to learn all of those from shofar. It's called a mamatzinu. Well, just like we find over here, the same thing should apply there. It's just a regular comparison. The Gemara says, "Mitkiya shofar Rosh Hashanah lekal migmar." You can't learn from that. In other words, the fact that shofar pushes off Shabbos is done on Shabbos and the preparations for it on Shabbos, that would tell me nothing about any other mitzvah.
Rabbi Smith,
Yeah.
and the Gemara learns a separate pasuk for each one of those mitzvahs to push on Dolchei Shabbat.
Basically, that's what we've been doing. By the Omer, we said by Yom, Afilu b'Shabbos. By the lulav, we said Shivas Yom. We had for each one. Sukkah, we said Shivas Yamim. And the sukkah was Shivas Yamim from Lulav. No, the Lulav was Bayayim Rishon. So each one had a pasuk. And we're asking, why do you need all those psukim? You can just learn from the shofar, and it would be a regular comparison. The mamatzino. We call it binyanav in Rabbi Shmuel. It's called the binyanav. Binyanav means that I have a father that everything else is learned out of. In the Gemara, it's called the mamatzino. Just like we find here, so too everywhere else, it's a comparison. Yeah, in school, mamatzino is the most common issue because the kids are always like, it's not fair. So that's like a perfect mamatzino. Why does he get? So well, he's different. He finished his work. He can go out there, he says. But it's not fair. So you can't learn from shofar. Shofar is different. Why? Shofar, it's interesting, it brings in this whole agarata. The shofar is so important, it brings the remembrance of the Jewish people in front of Hashem. You can't learn from that. That is going to push off Shabbos. That's very significant. But the Gemara says, you can't learn from the yovel that you blow on Yom Kippur. Why? Damar tiku bezdin shofar. When the bezdin blows the shofar on Yom Kippur, on yovel, on once in 50 years, in the Jubilee, niftara avadim lebateim v'sadis chayzus baleim. That's a huge event. The fields go back to their owners. The slaves go free. The Jewish slave that wanted to stay longer, he would stay up until 50 years. And then 50 years would be the Jubilee year. Then he would go free. So that shofar blast was the announcement. That would be done even on Shabbos. There are all these important things that were dependent on that. That could push off Shabbos. That doesn't tell me that anything else is going to push off Shabbos.
So which shofar blowing is Rabbi Lezer talking about that's on Shabbos? So
the fact that the shofar is done on Shabbos, that's not a chiddush.
Which blowing is that?
He's talking about the shofar of the preparation of the shofar of Rosh Hashanah.
We said we can't learn from it.
We can't learn from the preparation of the shofar Rosh Hashanah to tell me anything else. In other words, what we did on this Amud is that each one needed its own individual pasuk to have a source that the preparations of those mitzvahs are pushing off Shabbos.
Got it.
Okay, now we go back. Mila Amar Mar. I think I'm supposed to, I don't know. It's in parentheses. In the yeshivas, they told us that you don't read the parentheses, you just read the brackets. Okay, we said Mila v'chol machshira deichatz Shabbos de Rabbi Lezer. Back to our original discussion. Bris. Bris is done on Shabbos, if it's on the 8th day. Rabbi Lezer holds that you even do the preparations for the bris. You can prepare a knife. You can bring a knife. All of those things. You can make the knife. That's Minali Rabbi Lezer. Where does Rabbi Lezer know this? Let's say he learns from all of those things. Well, you know how many things we had over here? We had probably 6 or 7 things. If you do Omer Shtei Alechem, the lulav, the sukkah, the matzah, the shofar of Rosh Hashanah, the shofar, 6 things, the shofar of Yovel. It's a bunch of things. All together should be able to teach me. If you combine them all together, it's called a matzad. It's a mamatzino with a bunch of things. Well, just like we find by those, what's the common denominator of those? That they all push off Shabbos or for whatever. So also Mila should push off Shabbos. So it says Kedam Rinan. You can't learn from those. Each one has its own individual reason why that's specific. We went through it already. So the lulav has the 4 things, and the sukkah is by night and by day, and each one had its thing. Matzahs, men and women. Va'id. And also, Malahanach Shekinim Aver Zman Batla. those are very significant. Those you get one shot. Once it passes, Sukkot passes, say, oh, well, can't shake the lulav now. Can't sit in the sukkah now. Sukkot is over. So if you miss it, you missed it. Matzah, it's only one night. But a bris, you don't miss it. You missed it on time, but you can still do a bris the next day. His whole life you can do the bris. So the fact that those mitzvahs push off Shabbos, that doesn't tell me anything about Mila. Maybe Mila, bris Mila, the circumcision could be done later. You don't need to eat the preparations we're talking about. Preparations shouldn't violate Shabbos. Elahainu time with Rabbi Lezer. What's the reason for Rabbi Lezer that he holds that the preparations push off Shabbos? It says, on the 8th day, you circumcise his foreskin on the 8th day. That tells me that it's even on Shabbos. Now, Rashi makes a very important point here. He says, that just tells me that the circumcision is on Shabbos. Rabbi Lezer is getting another step. He's getting that the preparations for the circumcision are on Shabbos. How does he know that? Because the pasuk is telling me that you do a circumcision on Shabbos, but that wasn't our question. The question was, can you prepare a knife? So Rashi explains that really the fact that a circumcision is on Shabbos, that I know for other reasons. I know from other reasons. It's halacha mishmisinai, whatever. It's a tradition. So what do I need Bayayim for? Bayayim is telling me preparations for a bris. That's what we're getting from this. And that's the machlekes Rabbi Lezer and the sages. The Gemara says, well, and then let's do it the other way. If this is a really good limud, that preparations for a bris could be done on Shabbos because it says Bayayim. So let's make a comparison to all those other 6 things. And we'll learn those from Mila, from circumcision. The Gemara says, Mishum dikla mifrach, you can say no. There's 13 covenants that are mentioned in regards to bris. This is a huge mitzvah, the circumcision. It's not a minor mitzvah that will say, well, if Mila pushes off Shabbos and everything else. No. Mila is really something. That is a very powerful mitzvah. That pushes off Shabbos, even the preparations, but the other things not. Not matzah, not lulav, sukkah. So I need special psukim for them to tell me that they do. Okay, the Gemara starts over here, very interesting. I see there's 2 dots. Usually it would quote something and then quote a source. It just goes on with the discussion. It says, Ad kan lepligi Rabbanan el machshirei Mila. What's the machlekes? The Rabbanan and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says preparations for the bris of Shabbos. And the Rabbanan say only the bris itself. And where do we know that from? That the bris itself pushes off Shabbos. Everyone agrees to that. Where do they know it from? Amar Ula halacha. Ula was a traveler, an Amira. He says that it's a halacha, means it's a tradition. Halacha Moshe Misinai. Rabbi Yitzchak halacha. Rabbi Yitzchak also says it's a tradition. It's interesting. They're not bringing the pasuk Bayayim. It's interesting. That fits with what we learned before, that Bayayim was Rabbi Lezer's limud. That Rabbi Lezer uses Bayayim to tell me even the preparations. But how do I know the thing itself pushes off Shabbos? The bris itself pushes off Shabbos. It's performed on Shabbos. That I know from tradition. Meisvei, the Gemara is a question. Shabbos. Gemara is quoting here a Tosefta, very interesting Tosefta. How do you know that saving a life takes precedence over Shabbos? So Tosefta in the back of the Gemara. If you have a big Gemara, the old traditional Gemara, so it's Perek Tezayin, Yud Gimel. It's on page 14, and if you have a big Gemara in the Tosefta, way in the back. And so there's different opinions there. Anyway, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah gives his his response. How do we know this? If I can do a bris on Shabbos, that's only one mitzvah. It's only one of the person's. It's a mitzvah with one of the person's limbs. And that pushes off Shabbos. So for sure, a person's entire life should push off Shabbos. What does he mean? That's a mitzvah. He's ignoring the mitzvah aspect of this. He's saying, if I need to correct one part of a person's body, I need to remedy one part of a person's body because he has a bris. He has a foreskin, it needs to be remedied. So that pushes off Shabbos to remedy one part of a person's body. So to remedy the whole body, for sure, that should push off Shabbos. That's how he's viewing it. What's the problem? Big deal. Why is that an issue for us? The Gemara says like this. Where is he getting his Kal V'chomer from? Kal V'chomer, a fortiori, this type of logic, that if Mila pushes off Shabbos, which is something minor, for sure something greater should push off Shabbos. That sort of logic. Where's he getting it from? He's getting it from Mila. Now, where do I know that Mila pushes off Shabbos? If the whole reason that circumcision pushes off Shabbos is because of tradition, so Kal V'chomer me'alacha miyasi, can I make a Kal V'chomer from a tradition? Tradition is a tradition. You can't make a Kal V'chomer from it, which is very interesting, because those 13 attributes, 13 ways of studying the text, which for Rabbi Shmuel Eimer and Kal V'chomer Gzeir Shava Binyanav that we say in the morning, those 13 only apply to verses. And we always thought that Kal V'chomer was just logic. Yeah, and the Kal V'chomer you could apply it to anything. You know, if a weak person can pick up 10 pounds, so for sure a strong person can pick up 10 pounds. It's just logical. But the Gemara is saying over here that no, it's logical, but I can't use it to teach me anything except from psukim, because it could be that there's a specific reason for those. That's a tradition. You can't learn from that. So we're asking, if Ula is correct, that the reason why a bris pushes off Shabbos is because of a tradition, how does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah come and learn Koach Nefesh as a Kal V'chomer from that? So in the Gemara proves this point. It says, V'atani, we have a brisa, Amalei Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says to Rabbi Akiva, he calls him Akiva, Rabbi Akiva, in this quote, said that when a nazir becomes tamei, a nazir, someone that takes a vow not to drink wine for 30 days, when he becomes tamei, he becomes impure from a cemetery or a corpse, so he has to shave his hair and start over. He has to bring certain sacrifices. The question was, if there's a certain amount of blood that's contained in a tent, in a building, under a roof, does that also make a nazir tamei? And Rabbi Akiva said a Kal V'chomer from a bone. A small bone under a roof doesn't make a person tamei, normally. But if there's a revius, a certain amount of blood, then under a roof, a person does become tamei. So, if the nazir has to cut his hair because he touched the bone, he for sure has to cut his hair because he was under the roof. That has a revius dam. Now, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah responds to Rabbi Akiva. He says, 1 second. Etzem kasa'ir metame halacha. The fact that tiny bone the size of a barley, gives off tumah if someone touches it, that is a tradition. You're telling me a Kal V'chomer off that tradition. Revius dam is a Kal V'chomer. You're telling me from a Kal V'chomer about that if etzem kasa'ira, a nazir has to So for sure, Revi'as Da'am, a Nazir has to cut his hair and start over. Vein dan Kal V'chomer Halacha. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you can't learn a Kal V'chomer from Halacha. So you see, if the whole basis, back to what we're talking about, if the whole basis of how bris overrides Shabbos is a tradition, is a halacha Moshe Sinai, then how do you learn Pekuach Nefesh from that? It's impossible that it's halacha Moshe Sinai. It must be that there's an actual source, a text that says it. Elam Rabbi Elazar, rather Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Elazar ben Padas, the Amayra in Eretz Yisrael, the student and friend of Rabbi Yochanan, not Rabbi Eliezer de Mila. That's Rabbi Elazar Satana on the top of the page, Rabbi Elazar de Mila. That's Rabbi Elazar ben Horkanes. This is Rabbi Elazar ben Padas. Amar Rabbi Elazar Asya Ois. We learn it from a word. It says that Shabbos, it says Ki Oisi Li'olam, right? And by Mila it says Vayalois Bris. It's a sign. Ois means sign. So that teaches me that this sign is just as significant and pushes off the other sign. It says Elamiyata, 1 second, really? Because it says sign and over there it says sign, that means that one pushes off the other one. Tefillin d'ksiv b'anois, litchi Shabbos. Tefillin should push off Shabbos. It's really the opposite. Because it says sign, you don't wear it on Shabbos. Ela asya bris. No, we're not going to learn from the sign because then tefillin is going to mess that up. So we learn it from the fact that it says covenant by a bris mila, okay? And it says covenant, a bris, by Shabbos. It says, l'deirisam bris olam, we say it in Kiddush. So, that's why the bris pushes off Shabbos. It says, gadol d'ksiv bei bris litchi Shabbos. So if that's the case, then why, if there's a mila shaloi bizmana, if for whatever reason the child didn't get his bris, maybe it was ill or whatever, we don't do that bris on Shabbos. It's only if it's exactly on the 8th day we do it on Shabbos. Otherwise, we do it when he's ready. We do it on Sunday. But let's say he's ready on Shabbos. So then you don't do it on Shabbos. You do it the following day. Why don't you do it on Shabbos? It says bris over there as well. Ela asya deris. Now we say that we're going to learn from the word deris. It says for generations. By Shabbos, it says l'deris am bris olam. And by a bris on the 8th day, it says the word deris. Ben shminas yamim yimalachem kol zachar l'derisechem. Bris on the 8th day, it says deris. Okay, so it's only a mila. It's called mila bismana, mila in its time. Tzitzis t'ksiv bei deris l'tchi Shabbos. By tzitzis, it says. It says also the deris, but I forgot the pasuk over there. Elam Rab Nachman b'Yitzchak danen ois bris v'deris, meis bris v'deris. Lafukei hanach t'chad hu t'ksiv ben. It's all three. Yeah, each one you had different mitzvahs that have one of those words. Yeah, but that's on. You need all three cards to push off Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, that was Rabbi Elazar tried to get it from Ois. It didn't work. Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak perfected it that it's three words together. Ois bris and deris. Rabbi Yochanan amar Rabbi Yom. Goes back to what we thought originally. Top of the page, we said, how does the bris push off Shabbos? We said it says, Bayayim Hashmini, Bayayim Afilu b'Shabbos. On the 8th day. It means that extra word, it didn't have to say Bayayim. Could have said Bashmini, which would also tell me the 8th day.
Why couldn't Rabbi Elazar learn from the word Bayayim?
Why didn't Rabbi Eliezer learn from the word Bayayim? Yeah. Well, the problem is, Rabbi Eliezer learns from the word Bayayim, then he doesn't know Machshirei Mila.
Oh, so he used Machshirei.
He used, what we were really doing here is we were learning the Mila itself came from Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. The fact that a bris is performed on Shabbos, that's Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. Where do I know that? Preparations for the bris? Bayayim. That's what we were learning before. Comes along Rabbi Yochanan and says, no, the bris itself I know from Bayayim. It messes up Rabbi Eliezer, because how does Rabbi Eliezer know that preparations for the bris? If the bris itself is Bayayim, I only have one pasuk. So Rashi over here explains that Rabbi Yochanan is not explaining Rabbi Eliezer. He still holds that it's halacha. If it's halacha, then you can't learn pekuach nefesh from it, because you can't learn a kal v'chomer from halacha. Says, yeah, he doesn't hold like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that he learned Pekuach Nefesh from Halacha. He holds there's other sources that saving a life overrides Shabbos. He doesn't need to learn it from a Kal V'chomer, that if remedying one organ overrides Shabbos, then for sure the whole body. Rabbi Elazar doesn't hold like that. So once you don't hold of that, then you can learn that the fact that a bris is performed on Shabbos is a tradition. Why do the preparations override Shabbos? That I learned from the pasuk by Yomi. That's only Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Yochanan is now explaining the opinion of the Rabbanan that say the preparations don't override Shabbos. How do I know a bris itself overrides Shabbos? That I learned from Yomi. B'yom afila b'Shabbos. It's Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, later on in the Gemara, we're going to have a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan, and we'll see. Amalei Rish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish was his brother-in-law. He says to him, if that's the case, Mechusri Kapara is anyone that was impure. So whatever it was, a woman that gave birth, or a zav, someone that had a mission, or a mitzayra, a leper that was becoming pure. The last step of the purification process is they bring a sacrifice. It's called kapara, an atonement, but it really means a cleansing. It's the last step of their cleansing. So over there it says that they bring it on Shabbos. It says B'yom Tzavase, I think. B'yom Tzavase. B'yom Tzavase. So it says B'yom. So maybe you should be allowed to bring these personal sacrifices on Shabbos. It says B'yom. It says that pasuk I'm using already to teach me that it's by day and not by night. Yeah, it's important, that pasuk, but it's teaching me something else. So Hainami Baile B'yom V'le B'layla. But what about the bris? The bris is also only done by day. You never had a bris at night. Maybe Mila Shle Bismana, there's an opinion. But Mila Bismana is for sure by day. And the 8th day, the bris is always by day. Even Shle Bismana, we don't do it by night. So Sahu Mi Ben Shmeinas Yom Nafka. Okay, the fact that a bris is by day, I know because it says Mi Ben Shmeinas Yamim. It says 8th day. So the Gemara says, 1 second, Hainami B'yom Tzavasi Nafka. I have another pasuk that says B'yom Tzavasai. No, I'm sorry. By Mechusrei Kapara, it says that you bring it when the animal is 8 days old. No, B'yom Hashmini. I'm so sorry. It doesn't mean the animal is 8 days. So that's a different halacha. By the Mechusrei Kapara, it says that 7 days, after 7 days, they go to the mikveh, and then on the 8th day, they bring their sacrifice. They need to wait 1 more day to bring the sacrifice. It says B'yom Hashmini. It's mamish like the same pasuk as a bris. It should be on Shabbos. We need a pasuk tell me by day. I have another B'yom that tells me by day. So the Gemara says, Afagav denaf can be tzavasi. It's stricha. It still needs to say B'yom Hashmini. Why? If someone can't afford the sacrifices, then there's other options. There's other options that they bring. They can bring a bird or depending on which bracket they're in. So they bring out the sacrifices. So the fact that those sacrifices have that option, so I could have thought that maybe you're allowed to bring it by night as well. We're lenient about that one. That one like has other options. So it needs an extra pasuk to tell me that it's done by night, that it's not performed by night. Okay. So B'yom is going to work to teach me that a bris is done on Shabbos. And you can ask me about those other sacrifices that it says B'yom Hashmini as well. Those sacrifices tell me that B'yom Hashmini, by those sacrifices, tell me that it's done by day. Maskefla Ravina. If you have those leniencies by those sacrifices, and you needed a special pasuk to tell me that it can't be done by night. Do you have a special pasuk that says that it needs to be a kayan? if you're going to take it out of all of the limitations of a regular sacrifice, and you need an extra pasuk to tell me that it needs to be done by day, so what about the other limitations that sacrifices have? Gemara says, ha'hadrikra. No. Once we have bayayim, we bring it back into a regular category of a sacrifice. Now I don't need each halacha to be learned. The bayayim tells me that those sacrifices, even though they have different brackets for when you, for if you could need to bring an animal or if you can bring a bird, but once I have bayayim that tells me that it needs to be by day, then I see it's a regular sacrifice. And then I don't need psukim to tell me that it needs to be a kayan and that the kayan can't be an einin. Einin is the first day that a close relative passed away. It's not allowed to do the service. I don't need a pasuk to teach me that he's not allowed. Okay. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar, Rav Acha bar Yaakov has a different approach than Rabbi Yochanan. He says, Amar kra shmini afila b'Shabbos. He says that the word bayayim teaches me that you don't do it by night. But the word shmini tells me on the 8th, that tells me even if the 8th is on Shabbos, you do it anyway. The Gemara says, but that's not an extra word. Shmini is telling me that you don't do it on the 7th day. It says, shvimi ben shmeinos yamim nafk. Well, it says that somewhere else. It says ben shmeinos yamim, that it has to be 8 days old. Well, he says, one of them is telling me that you don't do it on the 7th, and one's telling me that you're not supposed to do it on the 9th. Maybe you'd think that from the 7th day and on, from the 8th day and on, you're allowed to do it. If it only say one pasuk, I would say, well, the 7th day, it's not old enough. But once it's 8 days old, it's old enough. You don't have to do it on the 8th day. I could do it on the 9th. It has to tell me, that you do it on the 8th day specifically. Ela machvarta kid Rabbi Yochanan. The word chiver means white. Machvarta means it's much clearer. It's much better to learn like Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, bayayim tells me that it needs to be on the 8th day, even if that 8th day is Shabbos. Very interesting expressions on this page. I'll bring you a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan and not Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov. The brisa says, Shmini Gimel. On the 8th day, you do the circumcision, it's quoting the pasuk, and that means Afila b'Shabbos. Even if it's on Shabbos, you do a bris on Shabbos. Mani Mekayim. What do I do with the verse Mechalel Maisimas? Someone that violates the Shabbos is put to death. Very strict punishment. What do I do with that pasuk? Maybe it's telling me that you can't perform a bris on Shabbos. The Gemara says, B'shar malachas chutz mimila. It's not talking about a bris. A bris you can still do on Shabbos. How do you know? Maybe it's referring to bris as well. The pasuk says that on the 8th day you should circumcise. Chutz mi Shabbos. That means as long as it's not on Shabbos. Talmud Leimer bayayim. Pasuk says bayayim on the day, which says the 8th day, afila b'Shabbos, even if it's on Shabbos. What we just did is we brought a support for Rabbi Yochanan that says that ultimately the word bayayim teaches me that it's performed on Shabbos. A circumcision is performed on Shabbos. However, in this brisa, we went back and forth. We started off saying, maybe it means this, or maybe it means that, right? What's Mechal Ma'isimus referring to?
Rabbi Yochanan is holding like Rabbi Eliezer?
Tell me again.
So Rabbi Yochanan is holding like Rabbi Eliezer?
No, Rabbi Eliezer would have told me that the preparations are done on Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that the bris is done on Shabbos.
And Rav Acha bar Yaakov is holding?
Rav Acha bar Yaakov was also saying that the bris is done on Shabbos. They're just bringing support that an actual circumcision is done on Shabbos. And the question was, what word teaches me that the actual circumcision is done on Shabbos?
They're all learning from the same word, but they're learning different things, basically.
Well, we had a bunch of, everyone's learning basically from the two dots on the top of the page, Adkan. From there down to here is a bunch of suggestions why a circumcision is performed on Shabbos. Prior to this, we were discussing why preparations for a circumcision, according to Rabbi Lezer. But all of this was just the actual bris itself. How do we know that it overrides Shabbos? And so we had Ois, bris, this. We had Bayayim, Rabbi Yochanan. We had Shmini, according to Rabbi Bar Yaakov. Ultimately, we bring a brisa at the end that supports Rabbi Yochanan, that says, well, maybe someone that does a bris on Shabbos is put to death. You say, no. We say, Bayayim. Bris is done on Shabbos. And that's a support to Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer would have told me that this is telling me even the preparations. But the Gemara here is just discussing the actual bris. Amar Rava. Rava comes along and is going to discuss this brisa. Now, if you look carefully at the brisa is sort of like thinking out loud. It says, a circumcision is performed on Shabbos. Shmini yimal afilu b'Shabbos. The Gemara said, the brisa says, what about the pasuk? Anyone that violates the Shabbos is put to death. It says, oh, that's talking about other things, not a bris. It says, maybe not. Maybe it's talking about a bris. This is like thinking out loud. So Rava comes along and says, why originally what was his logic in saying that, oh, it's not talking about, when it says that anyone that violates Shabbos is put to death, it's not talking about a bris. What gave him the confidence to say that? And then immediately he says, or maybe not, maybe it's talking about even someone that performs a bris. And the only way of resolving it was with a pasuk of Bayayim. The way Rava puts it is, what was his initial understanding on what switched? This logic that we see here, this is like a Tosfos sort of logic. It's like a later, usually, I don't know if you see this sort of logic regularly in the Gemara, where you challenge, what was the first person, what was he thinking before he had the answer? And now that he has what was he thinking in his question? He must have understood this. So then what did he gain by the answer? This is being introduced here. This sort of, what did he know when he was saying that it pushes off, that a bris pushes off Shabbos? And then what did he say that said, no, a bris doesn't push off Shabbos, and I need a pasuk to tell me that it does? So it says, Hachi Kamar. He had some logic that went back and forth. It goes like this. Shmini yimal afilu b'Shabbos. Okay, that's quoting the brisa. On the 8th day, a bris is performed, even if it's on Shabbos. That's still quoting the brisa. So what do I do with the anyone that violates Shabbos is put to death? That's talking about other things, not a bris. Aval mila dachia my taima, but a bris will push off Shabbos. What's the reason? So we need to add some logic in, and then we'll get rid of the logic, and then we'll say it the other way. But first we need some logic. It says my time. It says kal v'chaymer. We learn it from a fortiori. It's a simple logic. Ma tzaras shadeichas avoda. If tzaras pushes off the avoda, tzaras means leprosy. If a kohen has leprosy, then he can't perform the avoda. Let's say all the kohenim have leprosy. Do they all cut off their leprosy spots to be able to do the avoda? No. No. Tzaras is going to push off avoda. They won't be able to perform so tzaras is stronger than avoda, than the service in the temple. Avoda deichas Shabbos, in the service in the temple pushes off Shabbos. So if A is stronger than B and B is stronger than C, so A is stronger than C, right? Tzaras pushes off avoda, and avoda pushes off Shabbos. So tzaras is stronger than Shabbos. Now mila daicha, now a bris pushes off tzaras. Why? Because if there is on the foreskin a tzaras, a spot of leprosy, and officially you're not allowed to cut off the leprosy, but if there's a circumcision, you are allowed to cut off the leprosy. So that means that a bris is stronger than tzaras. So of course, a bris pushes off Shabbos. Leprosy pushes off Avodah, which pushes off Shabbos. Shabbos shenitchas mi Avodah din shetei mila deichasa. Clear logic. That's what. I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So the Gemara here is rejecting the earlier suggestion that a Kal V'chomer is only based on Sukkim. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because each of these has a support from a pasuk. What we're doing here is we're saying that the fact that Tzaras pushes off Avodah, that could be based on the pasuk that says that someone that's impure or something can't serve. Okay? We could have a support for that. That's not necessarily a tradition. The fact that Avodah is done on Shabbos, that we have a pasuk support. The fact that Mila is done, even if there's Tzaras there, that's also a pasuk. So in other words, the foundation of all of these are psukim. Our problem before was that a foundation was a tradition, then I couldn't learn a Kal V'chomer out of that. All right?
Is it fair to say that it pushes off the avoda? It's just the avoda is done by a different kohen.
Yeah. So Rashi on the bottom of the page was concerned about that. So im akayinim tmeim b'tzaras v'akal tahirim. If all the kayanim are tamei with tzaras. That's what he's saying. It would actually push off the Avodah. That's the suggestion to avoid that issue. Yeah. Okay. So now, so now we switch back. So clearly Mila pushes off. Mila pushes off Shabbos because Mila pushes off Tzaras, which pushes off Avodah, which pushes off Shabbos. So this is my Eily Dika Amar. So what is the or maybe not? The Brisa said, or maybe not, and then we need a pasuk by Yomi to tell me that Mila pushes off Shabbos. It says, Hadar Amar Ma'ida Tzaras Chamura. How do you know that Tzaras is more strict than Shabbos? Dilma Shabbos Chamura. Maybe Shabbos is really more strict. Shekin Yesh Einshin, Tzaras Harbe. Because there's much bigger punishments for Shabbos. Death penalty, all types. There's many halachas, many warnings about Shabbos. Now, I don't know if you do the inami, but there's a follow-up here that explains, because we just had a Kal V'chomer. It says, why are you telling me that Tzaras pushes off Avodah, that no one's going to do the Avodah? You're not going to cut off the Tzaras, because Tzaras is so strict, that we're going to forgo service of the temple because of Tzaras, because you really have a solution. Really, you could cut it off, but you're not going to do it because Tzaras is. How do you know that that's the explanation? Maybe the fact that you don't cut off the Tzaras is because cutting off the Tzaras wouldn't help. Because even when you cut it off, he's still tummy. Maybe Dilma Mishum Gavur D'Leichazi, because he's still going to need to go to the mikveh and wait for evening. And basically you have to wait for the next day. And so the fact that I don't cut off the Tzaras is not because Tzaras is stricter than Avodah, it's because it just doesn't work. It's not effective. Umani Mekayim Shmini Yimal. So if I don't have a Kal V'chomer, so then how do I know that the bris is going to override Shabbos? Really, Tzaras is not stricter than Shabbos. I just don't cut off the Tzaras for the service because it doesn't work. So what would I do? Shmini Yimal, I would be chutz to Shabbos. You only do a bris if it's not Shabbos, from Sunday to Friday. Talmud Leimer Bayayim Afilu b'Shabbos. So the pasuk says Bayayim, back to Rabbi Yochanan. That's a brisa stronger than Rabbi Yochanan. The Bayayim tells me that a bris is performed on Shabbos. In other words, the Kal V'chomer wouldn't do it. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Start in a brisa. Mila deiches et Tzaras. A bris, a circumcision, pushes off Tzaras. That means if on the foreskin there's a spot of leprosy, you cut off the Tzaras, you cut off that spot because you cut off the foreskin. Bein bismana, bein shlei bismana. Whether the bris is on time, whether it's not on time. Now, Yom Tov, it means Shabbos or Yom Tov. Ein deicha ela bismana bilvad. the bris only pushes off Shabbos or Yom Tov if the bris is on the 8th day, not if it's on the 9th or 10th or whatever. Minani Mile, how do we know any of this? Tanar Rabbanan, Pasuk says, Yimal Basar Lasai, you circumcise the flesh of the foreskin flesh. Afal Pishisham Beheres Yikaitz. Even if there is a Beheres, which is a type of leprosy, a shade of spot of leprosy, still cut off. What do I do with the verse that says you should guard the spot of tzaras? It means you're not allowed to cut it off. That's only talking about other places besides for the foreskin. The Brisa says, how do you know? Maybe it's mila. Maybe everywhere you're never allowed to cut it off. So what do I do with the pasuk that says you cut off the foreskin? That's only if there's no leprosy on it. How do you know? It says Tamalemer bisar. It says bisar alasai, the flesh, and that extra word, it could have just said alasai. What does it teach me from bisar alasai? Avapishesham beheres. Even though there's beheres there. Take a look at this. Amar Rava says, Haitanami karam my kanichalei b'seif my kakashalei. Same logic. You just quoted a brisa. The brisa has a oy einay ella in it, or maybe not. That means that originally we said that the mila cuts off you cut off the foreskin even if there's tzaras on it, or maybe not. So why do you switch? What were you thinking before that you just switched, or maybe not? What was the first logic? You need to have something that's strong enough to make that suggestion, and then you have to reject it. We did this before once. We do it again here. Hachi kamar goes like this: Yimal besar lasiyaf b'sheshim beheres. You cut off the foreskin even though there's tzaras there. Mani makai mishamer b'neged tzaras. What do I do with the verse that says don't cut off the tzaras? B'shar makim schutz mimila. That's only the rest of the body. You're not supposed to cut it off. Aval mila deichet tzaras. But the circumcision pushes off tzaras. My timer. What's the reason for that? Who knows? What's the initial logic that this was so obvious? So the asya mikal v'chemer. We learn from mikal v'chemer. Ma Shabbos chamura. Shabbos is so strict. However, mila deichesa, but nevertheless, I do a circumcision on Shabbos. Tzaras lekolshkein. If a circumcision pushes off Shabbos, for sure it pushes off tzaras. And you cut off the foreskin even if there's tzaras there. So my einay the kamar. What is the oy einay, or maybe not? What do they mean by that? That's very clear. Mila for sure should push off tzaras. So it's how the kamar my the Shabbos chamira. How do you know that Shabbos is strict and Mila pushes off Shabbos? Doma tzaras chamira. Maybe tzaras is more strict. Shekin deichas avoda. Tzaras pushes off avoda. Avoda deichas Shabbos. This should sound familiar. Tzaras. If all the kainim have tzaras, you don't do the avoda, and avoda pushes off Shabbos. You see, tzaras is more strict. So Talmud Laimar Bisar. So that's why we need the pasuk Raf Pisheshim Beheres. Even though the flesh, even though there's tzaras there, you still cut it off. Let me go a little bit further. Lishnachrina Mila deichet tzaras my time. How do you know that the Mila pushes off tzaras? Well, to perform a circumcision is a positive command. To cut off the tzaras is a negative command. So it's very easy. Positive command pushes off the negative command. That's the rule. So what is the ayena, or maybe not? We're missing a piece of information here, and that's going to put it in. When do we say that a positive command pushes off a negative command? That's only if it's a regular negative command. But this has a positive command attached to it. What's the positive command? At the end of this, it says, you have to do everything that was, to perform everything that was taught. That means that there's a positive command that's attached to the negative commands of tzaras. So if that's the case, that's only if there's no tzaras there. Because if there is tzaras, then the mila doesn't cut it off. So therefore I need the pasuk of bisar. that the flesh of the foreskin, even if there is tzaras on it. So we had two options here, what the Havamina was, what the Maskana. First Havamina is that Milah should push off, if it pushes off Shabbos, for sure it pushes off tzaras. And then we said, well, maybe not. Maybe tzaras pushes off Shabbos itself because it pushes off Avodah, which pushes off Shabbos. So therefore I need the pasuk of Basar. The second option was maybe we should say Asay Asdeicha say. We respond that really tzaras has an Asay as well, and Asay doesn't push off it, a Asay and an Asay. So therefore I need the word Basar. I guess we should stop here.